community employment. And again, all these approaches that we all know, supported employment and whatnot, and customized employment, they all work and they all work well. You know, we use a customized approach because for the folks that we tend to serve in our projects and in the agencies that we work most closely with, you know, a lot of times those folks require more substantial approaches, more individualized approaches, more customized kind of approaches, you might say, to getting a job. So since we've already been through that foundation, I'm gonna talk about discovery, and I can tell you that when we're talking about discovery, we're talking about a process that is a very skilled process. It's not something that you're certainly not going to learn how to do discovery today. What we find is it takes about a year after you've been through a substantial amount of classroom and field-based instruction. Then it takes about a year of practice before you get at. So it's a little less than maybe what Malcolm Gladwell talks about when he talks about, you know, how do you achieve excellence in a skill that, you know, what he's famous for having that 10,000 hours of practice benchmark. It's probably not that intense, but you do have to do it for a while before you bring your effort down to a reasonable amount, and until you can sort of look and intuit things that you're seeing. So so we're gonna let me frame discovery, and discovery, of course, is sort of the cornerstone or the foundation of a customized approach. It's very much rooted in the idea of person-centered planning, and most of you know what person-centered planning is. What we found over the years of messing with this and different approaches was that we were very early adopters of person-centered planning, and were applying it to employment back in the late 80s. And what we found over the years is that while there are great elements to person-centered planning, we were always kind of frustrated that it left out things like finances, which we think are pretty important. So we would add things like financial maps, and then we would look more at career building, and we would look more at skills, and you know, our friends, other folks, Ellen Condon at the Rural Institute, most significantly Michael Callahan at Mark Gold Associates, we were all working on these things sort of simultaneously, recognizing the weakness of one system and the need for another. And in 1996, we published a manual on person-centered career planning that for us held a lot of the elements that have evolved into what discovery is. And we've shared information back and forth with colleagues around the country, and we've come up with kind of our hybrid of discovery, which is discovering personal genius. But that's a mouthful, so I'm just going to talk about discovery today. But our process differs from other people's processes a lot in that it has been developed working with vocational rehabilitation counselors around the country and trying to work into milestone systems. And also because we saw that one of the problems with person-centered planning and one of the problems with early discovery, you know, if we went back 10 years, was that people would kind of make a career out of doing discovery with people, that every day a person's different, of course, and so they just keep adding information. The point with discovery is sort of this rapid engagement into the workforce, but not so rapid that we're making bad job matches. We really do want to put somebody in a job that matches what the conditions of employment are for that person, where it enhances the contribution that they can make, where they can meet the unmet needs of an employer in particular areas. And also this idea that this job may be fairly temporary, or it may be, you know, a long-term placement, but the point being that folks are going to learn more skills and tasks in the job. It's not a dead end. And so while I will say over and over again that there are no bad jobs, right, there are really bad job matches for folks. And we all know, we're all guilty of it. I certainly am, of, you know, getting somebody in a job just because someone was hiring. And we're going to talk about that in the next session on job development more. But it's really hard to talk about discovery if you're not talking about job development or creating a business with somebody. So just to frame it, just to give you some reason why we do discovery, it's because it's a more powerful strategy for a lot of folks. We're also working on a new manual on self-guided discovery so that families can use it, individual self-advocates or consumers can use it, and because we work across disability lines. While we focus primarily in this series around intellectual and developmental disabilities, these processes work with all our clientele, which range from, someone on the autism spectrum to a veteran with a service-related disability returning from Afghanistan. So we need tools that are adaptable, and that's one of the reasons why we like discovery, because we can adapt it to the individual because it's highly individualized. And as you learned in the last session, customized employment is a non-comparative approach. So I'm not taking IQ into account. I'm not taking standardized testing into account. I'm not worried about how they did on a micro tower or a McCarran dial or some other kind of standardized vocational assessment, because that doesn't tell me about the individual. Those might be perfectly fine evaluations for some people, but generally not for the folks that we work with. They don't tell us things in real environments, and discovery is done in a variety of environments, but not in a testing laboratory. So we begin discovery with the premise that everyone can work. Now, that's hard for a lot of people to believe, but once you've granted an exception, it leaves you, it's like freedom of speech. Once you grant an exception, then there are a lot of exceptions. This doesn't mean that we're all smart enough to figure out everybody we work with. I know I'm certainly not smart enough to figure out where and when everybody can work. But it's a team sport, right? And so we work in teams, and the worst thing we can do is give up on somebody, because we know from the evolution of our services back in the late 70s, when I'm a pretty old guy now, when we were starting to take people out of institutions and bring them into our community programs in Colorado, I was taking out people out of the institutions who in a lot of ways today probably could not get services. And then we were serving people who today you would still struggle with too. But who we thought could live and work in the community has really changed dramatically over the last 30, 35 years. And so, we worked with people in the 70s and the 80s who, everybody thought could not ever work, and they've held down careers or owned businesses now for 20 years in some cases. So we're wrong when we say that somebody can't work. And I'll tell you what's happening around the country is that is becoming more and more an issue as like states like Utah have adopted employment first policies and practices. The state of Wisconsin, for instance, their voc rehab agency, and I may have mentioned this last time, they have issued a policy directive in the state that says they will not pay for a vocational assessment that says that somebody is not ready to work. They just won't pay that. They believe everybody is ready for work, and so we need to believe that as well. Discovery obviously is the basis of employment planning. We plan first, and then we act on that plan. Discovery and the employment plan is driven by the applicant's vocational themes, which we'll talk a little bit about, their strengths, their needs, their interests, and what we call their conditions of employment. In other words, that fitment, that ecological fit, what we would call ecological validity, a place where it makes sense that this person works. And we all know that people lose their jobs, not, you hire for skills, but, you hire for the fact that people can't fit in very well. So that kind of frames discovery. And our challenge in discovery is to create lasting, satisfied, person-directed employment beyond the confines of traditional job development. one of the things that I've been collecting at least anecdotal data on in our sites around the country is that it's really no harder to get a good job for somebody than it is to get a bad job for somebody. And simultaneously, it's no more expensive to get a bad job for somebody than it is to get a good job for them. That what happens in Customize is we spend a little bit more time up front, and we learn a lot more about our community, we learn a lot more about the commerce that goes on, and we learn a lot more about individuals and families and support networks. And so if I go out and I get somebody a job at a box store, well, I spend a fair amount of time on that with the application and the, helping through the interview and then the job coaching. And a lot of times those are not good matches for people. It was just simply that, well, the door was open at the box store and they were going to hire 3 associates and we got one of those positions, but now it turns out that the person doesn't like the job and they only keep it for 6 months or 6 weeks or 6 days or 6 hours. We've all had those problems. I certainly have lived through those. Or we're constantly patching the job up. We've got, 40,000 job coaching hours in it, and it's very expensive to do that. Plus, it hurts our reputation. It hurts the reputation of people with disabilities. It hurts the VR counselor if they worked with you. If you wrote a PASS plan, now you got troubles with Social Security. The family's not happy. The individual isn't happy. How is that cheaper than doing the work up front that minimizes job loss? And again, jobs were meant to be lost. We know that. There's no such thing as a secure job, but we can do a much better job of getting jobs that pay better, that last a little bit longer, that have more work hours per week if we put in the time up front. And of course, we've got to work on the funding mechanisms that allow us to do that. And so, it's this idea of everything all at once. We've got to have our ducks in the row, and we've got to have our funders on board who understand what we're doing with discovery or discovering personal genius. And this is why I say you need training in this. You can't do discovery from a webinar. There are too many nuances to it, but you'll get an idea. So one of the things that we do in discovery is we use a process called smooth listening. And smooth listening is a term that I came up with a number of years ago because I saw in family visits, which is where discovery starts, if there's a family involved, whether the person still lives there or not, and most people with intellectual disabilities, or the majority of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, still live with their parents nationwide. A lot of times we don't realize that, but there's a lot of buy-in from families, or potential support from families, that a lot of times we haven't captured very well. But we do a home visit just to get a read on the family, to look at the supports that are there, to look at the connectedness of the family. But we don't go in with a checklist. In fact, I teach the folks that I work with that you don't go in with anything. That you go in with yourself and probably another person. I always like to have 2 people in discovery and in the home visit, going in and talking to at least one of the parents if they're available, siblings, friends and neighbors if they can come over and join us. But this is their time to sort of chat. And I'll usually start out with something like, well, tell me about yourself if it's just an individual in their house or their apartment, or tell me about your daughter, or tell me about your son growing up. And usually what happens is that people they'll look at you and they'll say, well, what do you want to know? Because, their traditional interaction with human services folks is that we're after an answer. And so when we ask the question, we're looking for a black and white kind of answer. Well, I don't know what I'm looking for. That's why we call it discovery, is that I will probably discover things that I had no idea existed. So when we go, we want to look at the person's bedroom with permission. We want to see what they surround themselves with. What do they spend their money on? But I'm more interested, again, in having sort of this family story told. And a lot of times I'll find out things like, well, when John was born, I had, the dad spent, 6 weeks in the hospital with him because mom had, problems with the delivery, and and the kid was on a ventilator for 6 weeks, and and now what we're asking the family, which kept their child alive for many, many years now, we're asking them to take the risk of going out and getting a job. And a lot of times we say, well, those parents, they're just being overprotective. Well, it was their overprotection that kept their son or daughter alive. And sometimes we need to be reminded of that there are reasons for behavior. There are reasons why sometimes families may resist you. The other thing is that we haven't delivered on our promises very well, right? That we've been promising people jobs for a century now, and only about 22% of individuals with intellectual disabilities have a job. And it would be even, and most of those are underemployed. If you're talking about folks with psychiatric disabilities, you're talking an employment rate of less than 17% today. So, there's not a lot of reason people would trust that we're asking the right questions in the first place. If we get stuck, if we're doing our best, smooth listening, and not giving a lot of value to particular statements, and I'll explain that in a minute. When I get stuck, I always have some backup questions that I try not to ask as questions, but I need practice too. I try to have a conversation, so I try to work into, well, tell me about the kind of chores that Junior does around the house. That way I'm getting at skills and tasks that the person does. Skills and tasks are vitally important to getting a job. You don't have to be perfect at them, but if you're really great at at watering flowers, boy, knowing that, that's an entry-level gig somewhere. That gets me somewhere else. If it turns out that the person has an emerging agricultural theme, and I know that they can water flowers, where I can build on that as an instructor. I can figure that out. I can use my systematic instruction strategies to broaden that, to generalize that to other things. I can find a circumstance or an environment where that person fits. And I can test for a broader agricultural theme rather than, oh, this was just the thing that mom and dad made me do around the house and I really don't like it very much, because we probably don't want to pursue that if that's the case. Tell me about family celebrations, events, holidays, and vacations, and we'll talk about why that's important later. But I think, again, practicing smooth listening is mostly what we need to do. Typically, if you've ever been through, a 6-hour IEP meeting, or, an individual planning meeting that happens every 6 months in the adult world or whatever, that a lot of times it's a bunch of professionals sitting around a table firing questions at people. It's generally on our turf. Folks get locked into this idea that since we're professionals, we're looking for a particular answer. And so we fire yes or no questions. We ask questions that have no relevance, like, do you like bowling, Johnny? It really doesn't matter whether Johnny likes bowling or not. So don't ask those questions. What we want to see is, what do people are naturally attracted to, or where are their vocational skills in this case. And if bowling is one of them, it's great. We don't need to know whether they like it or not. If they do it every Friday night because they're on the local bowling team, then we're going to assume that they like that and move on. The other thing is that we get way ahead of ourselves in discovery a lot of times, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't jump the gun myself, so I have to listen to myself talk too. But we go from, yeah, bowling, that's great, he's really good at bowling, but you know what, I mean, he's never going to be a professional bowler, so why are we looking in that direction? We are way ahead of ourselves at that point. When we're starting discovery, we can't think in job descriptions. We can't be thinking about what job would be best. That's why we call it discovery. Discovery is going to take us to places where we find jobs that we didn't know existed, or opportunities for jobs that we didn't know existed. It's very much a job creation strategy, or a sort of a deconstruction of existing jobs, pulling out the different tasks that match who this person is, and then using our highly developed negotiation skills to say, hey, business such and such. You know, if you had your painter in here that's painting cars, you know, I noticed that they come out of the paint booth every 15 minutes to drain the water out of the air compressor. You know, we got a guy who's really great at opening valves, and he could do that every 15 minutes. And by the way, he's really into cars and art. And you know what? We could teach him how to sand a car and prep it for painting. Eventually, knowing that I may or may not be able to teach that person how to paint. But that's my entry level. It's not walking into a store and asking if they're hiring. You know, we're beyond that, I hope, at this point. So I want to know about major life events. And again, I don't know what I'm looking for, so these are fairly general questions. Tell me about teaching or support methods that you found helpful. Tell me about influential people that Johnny knows or that you know. Folks that we might be able to call on later to get, you know, to find out about a place where we could go do a discovery activity, or we could go, you know, do job development later when that became the thing, or maybe do a paid internship or, you know, a paid work experience or something. But this smooth listening is a critical part of discovery. If you're talking, you're not listening. And again, you know, try this when you're buying a car. If you're going out to buy a car, what the salesman tries to do right away is to get you talking, trying to get you talking to give up your information, right? You know, and they're not talking as much as you are. You know, and that means that they've got the upper hand. The person who is listening in a conversation is the one that's in control. So you always want to remember that. That's why the silent treatment works so well. So you can read more about this, obviously, and we can send you some resources. Some are already up, and certainly in our books. So this is the basic process. I wouldn't say that discovery is a linear process. It's more like life. You know, we attempt linear processes, but they you know, life has a way of foiling that and making things very nonlinear. In the first stage, we're talking about intake, introducing employment concepts and discovery to the individual, developing maybe an internal support team or an initial support team, folks that person wants to have around them, because discovery is not typically done by one person. It's generally done by, again, a host of people. It might be the rehab counselor doing a little bit. It might be, you know, the job coach or the employment specialist doing a piece, the teacher. It might be a friend. It might be a family member. All those kinds of relationships are important in this team approach. One set of eyes on discovery is not enough, though. It would be too much work, I think, for most individuals to do. It really should be a host of people. And part of that, too, is because we know that different people have different relationships with individuals. And, you know, I may be, you know, more keen on a particular environment and taking somebody there than, you know, than somebody else. So I want to try to match the individual who's supervising or facilitating a little bit better to the activity and to the individual. So so we usually try to draft at least some kind of discovery timeline, who's going to do what when. We might not have the specifics down yet, but we want to get a sense of when's the initial home visit going to happen, and you know, and sometimes we'll do the home visit and then sit down and draft a little bit of a plan. Mom said that, well, you know, Junior really loves to do the dishes. Okay, so we didn't have time while we were there. Let's go back at dinner time and you know, and wash the dishes and see how that goes. Or, you know, let's wash dishes somewhere else. You know, if the kid's still in school, maybe we go to the cafeteria and wash dishes for an hour or something, and see how they do. And is it something that they're good at? Is it something that they're attracted to? Is it something that we could teach, you know, more fluency to? Or is it something that, oh yeah, mom makes me do this and I'm not, you know, this is not really the thing. And here is a good time to sort of introduce another caveat to discovery, and that is that a lot of times, you know, folks with intellectual disabilities get locked into this, you know, food, flowers, fill, file, and fold, and fetching kinds of jobs. and and cleaning up other people's messes is a big deal. Well, I don't know. I don't like to clean up other people's messes. I'll clean up my mess sometimes, but we've got sort of this automatic assumption that's where we start, and it may be. I mean, I have a friend who's a machinist, and he started, in a machine shop as an apprentice, cleaning the toilets and making the coffee and all that stuff. But he also was being taught things about being a machinist, and that was part of the deal. So the cleaning the toilets wasn't the end of the job; it was the beginning of the job. And I just want us to keep in mind, one of the things that I challenge people with all the time is, geez, haven't we done this? Haven't we done enough janitorial? Haven't we done enough paper shredding? Haven't we done enough grocery bagging? Why can't we get out of that? There are 100 billion ways to make a living in this world, and we've found 5 of them. The next person who tells me they're going to the Humane Society, I don't know what I'm going to do to them. But we have to be a little bit more creative than that if we're going to break this cycle of unemployment for folks. So, if I hear that somebody is really good at cleaning, that's a great thing, because that can be a great job for somebody. What I would challenge you to do is to think in terms of, is this an emerging vocational theme around cleanliness? Because cleanliness is different than cleaning, right? And cleanliness, then when we think about, and in Discovery, this is what we do, we think about, where does that theme make sense? Where do other people with that theme work? What kind of jobs do they do? And so when I'm thinking about cleanliness, I'm thinking about a heart surgeon, or I'm thinking about that person who's doing $20,000 paint jobs on hot rods that doesn't want a speck of dust in them. I'm thinking maybe about the person who's working in the cancer lab, or somebody who's packaging spices at Fernandez Chili Company. Again, they don't have to be glamorous jobs, but we have to think in terms of, outside the box of cleaning someone else's toilet once in a while. It's a minor thing that I would suggest, but there are so many, many jobs that we just don't think about because we don't know our communities very well. So, again, it's a challenge to think, and again, it doesn't take any more effort once you get started to find a good job than it does to get that same old bad job over and over again. So we formalize a discovery plan. We use a thing called the discovery staging record. If you don't have that somewhere or a link to that, then you can email me and I will send you that if you are somebody who likes forms. I don't like forms particularly, but we use the DSR because it allows us to track our progress. It gives me a written record that I can hand to a VR counselor to say, here's where we are. It allows me to look at what the team's doing and say, ooh, we're kind of weak in this area. Let's look over here. How are you coming on identifying the 3 vocational themes that we're going to use for job development? So all of those things are important. So we formalize that, we expand team membership if we need to, and we look for businesses with people who have like interests and skills. And again, interests are part of the process, but not all the process, because again, interests are great, but they're not strong enough to get a job from. A lot of us have interests that we don't want to make our living in that. We find these are better as hobbies. These are better as things that, yes, we have an interest in that, but I'm probably never going to pursue that. I like some skills and tasks to build on. And generally, if you have some skills and tasks, even if they're at the very, very, very meager levels, I can build on that. And, if you care enough about something to start gaining interest and doing tasks related to that, then the interest is already there, is what I'm trying to say. So we also would do a benefits analysis at this point. We would look at, maybe their work record, if they have a work record, what kind of resources, what kind of supports are available, what's transportation look like for this person, because a job that you can't get to is really a pretty sucky job, right? again, by the time we get to stage 4, we're identifying discrete skills and tasks that the person does, talents and motivations, significant people and places. We're doing a few informational interviews with other employers, looking at getting advice. Basically, we use informational interviews a couple different ways in our process that we'll talk about it. We use them in discovery, and then we also use them in job development. The setup is a little bit different. We try to figure out, again, where is this person going to fit? What are their emerging vocational themes? And again, themes are hard. You have to work with themes for a while before you kind of get them. Themes are not job descriptions. They are sort of global categories that hold hundreds of thousands of job descriptions. So again, if you're working with somebody who says, I love puppies, the first thing you have to realize, of course, is that you've just identified every human being on Earth. Because you're very rarely going to meet a human being that doesn't like puppies. So you really don't have anything to build on from there. But if you see, that, wow, they like to feed their puppy and pet their puppy and train their puppy and clean up after their puppy and all that stuff, then you're starting to talk about skills and tasks. And now you can say, I'll bet you this person has never been around a giraffe before. So let's go explore that, or let's go explore the goat farm, or let's go explore something else. Let's go to the taxidermy. Let's go to the butcher shop. Whatever it is that involves animals, again, that list is almost unending, right? It's infinite. Even in a small town, you're going to be able to identify folks that you had no idea existed, but we're working with animals. But you've got to get out of your car. You got to talk to strangers. You've got to get in a different circle, right? You can't drive down Main Street because that's not where those stores are. It's not going to be in the box store. I can guarantee you. The HR people are not going to let you in anyway, in any substantive way. So this is very much a small business approach. Not always, but often. It's moving up other people's supply chains to see what exists. So, and by stage 5, we're working on work experiences and maybe some more informational interviews. We're completing the vocational profile that's part of the DSR, the discovery staging record. We're looking at, what's our transition to employment look like? What's VR going to play with? What's the workforce center maybe going to do with us? And then we're starting, once we've got our 3 vocational themes and we have evidence through discovery that these are real themes, that the individual, has vocational themes in the areas of, let's say, animals and art and transportation, then we can quit discovery. We're done with discovery after we have evidence for those 3 vocational themes, and then we move into job development, which is where we do our list of 20, and a list of 20 is 20 places in the community for each theme where that person might fit, where there are other people with that same theme working. Now that can be really hard to do, and that's the point. That getting those 20 places is tough. You have to get to know your community, but we're doing it even in very, very rural communities. It helps you stretch your brain and stretch your team a little bit. And again, it's a team sport. It's not you coming up with 60 places. Now, are you going to go to 60 places doing job development? No. You're going to go to a few of those places, but we're going to talk about that next time. So, so people always want to know, well, how long does discovery take? Even though we got people sitting in sheltered workshops for 30 years, we're worried about a technology that takes 6 or 8 weeks to do. 30 years is okay for us. We'll spend $1 million on somebody's day program, but we won't drop $2,000 or $3,000 on an assessment that will get you as close to employment as you're probably ever going to get. So here's our range. It depends on who we're working with. 20 to 50 hours right now, and that's from our sites around the country. That's totally, anecdotal. There is a lot of variation from state to state. Hopefully we've narrowed variation in our demo sites. We really do have people follow our process fairly tightly, but we're not there all the time. So, and again, every human being is different. This is a highly individualized process, just like supported employment, right? Supported employment is supposed to be a very highly individualized process. So is developing an IEP. So is developing a transition plan. So is developing the IPE that VR counselors do. Just read the Rehab Act. The Rehab Act is all about the individual, not about a group of people, not about a diagnosis, not about people like this should do these jobs. It's ridiculous. So we don't do that. It's highly individualized, and it's as scalable as anything that's ever been developed before. Right now, we're averaging 30 hours for discovery, and that's a lot of different. That's again, that kid on the autism spectrum to the returning Afghan, theater of war veteran with a disability. So again, in some cases we're matching apples to oranges, but I can safely say that after you've done discovery for a year, and that might be that you've done, you've helped 5 or 6 people through discovery, and you've done it, and you've learned your lessons, and you've worked on the teams, that you're probably pretty good at it, and you can probably do discovery on average in about 30 hours, again with that range of 20 to 50. So it actually, if you look at the cost, you're talking $500 to $2,000 in most state funding systems, whether you're using VR, whether you're using day program money from your Medicaid waiver, which you can do. It may not say discovery in there, but you're allowed to do individualized training and things with people, and that's how you code it. Different states do it differently, but it's perfectly legal to do that. And again, our VR around the country is doing it in different states at different amounts. Here in Utah, they're using life skills money to do it, and they're using their regular assessment dollars to do it. So you can write a pass plan sometimes through Social Security to do it. You can use classroom dollars to do discovery. That's what we're doing here with the Alpine School District right now. So, and again, it's not rocket science to figure out the money. The money hasn't been really the hard part. What's our return on investment for doing discovery? Well, I can tell you right off and from the ODEP reports, the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor, which is coming up with more and more data, and we're working on we're working right now on a data study of customized costs and benefits. But right now we're talking less job coaching by $500 to $2,000 per person, and so that pays for your discovery right there. The other piece is, again, a generalized job retention rate that's increased. How much? It depends. There's a wide variation in process. Again, a lot of people are saying that they're doing customized, but they're not doing customized. A lot of people say they're doing discovery, but I can guarantee you they're not doing discovery because they haven't been through the training, and there's only a few of us in the country who do discovery training. So, people adapt the words really early, but they don't necessarily adapt the process. And I just saw a state that had sort of pickpocketed us a little bit and had come up with a list of 10 instead of a list of 20. Well, a list of 10 is not rigorous enough. You won't get very good results from a list of 10. Why do we know that? Because we did it that way. And we learned our lesson through, 10 or 15 years of practice. So, but the Department of Labor numbers show that people instantly increased hours compared to other people. 2 to 20 more hours was very common in their data set from 20 different states. And people picked up over supported employment $1 to $5 more per hour. And so those are significant results, and those are from 2006 when most people didn't know what they were doing. They were just using little pieces of what we were figuring out as discovery and as customized job development approaches. It's better now. It's a better system. We've had another 8 or 9 years to practice. So when we're doing discovery, we have to, the age-old thing is you got to quit buying things that don't produce the desired results. Don't buy assessments that tell you that people need more training or they need a sheltered workshop or something. The data shows that the longer you're in a sheltered workshop, the more expensive it is to get you a job, right? Rob Samara, who works with us out of Kent State University, has documented this a number of times. You know, that if you keep buying things that don't work, you get results that are not very good. So don't buy things like that. We really want to put our money into assistance and not assessment, right? You know, now there are times when you need a really great, you know, neurological, or you need a really great psychological. I'm not arguing that, but I'm arguing as far as if you're buying things that still talk about job readiness, then you're wasting your money most of the time. I won't say all the time because there are always exceptions, but you need something more functional for somebody with the highest support needs around going to work. You know, and again, if you're using sort of standardized assessments, in interest inventories, things like that, those just do not. There is no data that substantiates the usefulness of that for folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities to any degree. So, again, quit buying that stuff. You know, you don't rely on data from segregated environments, because people are different in different environments. You have to go into other environments. We're working with a young man right now up in Utah County who in the home visit could not pay attention, was distracted other people and whatnot. But we went out on his work experience site yesterday, and he was totally in charge. I mean, he was totally doing the job, you know, and sort of organizing the site and getting things, you know, shipshape. Very, very different person. Had we taken data from that home visit and said, oh man, he's really distractible and he doesn't pay attention and, you know, he seeks attention and all these negatives, we would have probably right then would have determined, you know, say he was in a voc-eval lab. My guess, and I don't know this, but my guess would be, you know, that's not a great setting for him. And so you would have probably seen him doing irrelevant tasks on a micro tower or something. And, you know, what conclusion could you read but that, well, boy, he's not really employable. We don't want to put people in that place. If you're waiting for the time to be right for somebody, for their behavior to improve a whole lot, and again, I'm not suggesting that people do dangerous things, you know, with dangerous people, you know, that those environments have to be right. And the supports have to be right, and there have to be strong support. You know, it needs to be, you know, you need to take all the precautions you can take. But, you know, if I wait for somebody to quit picking their nose, for instance, in the workshop before I consider them ready for employment, that ain't never going to happen. So I just need to move forward. As long as it's not life-threatening or threatening injury to that person or others, I need to move forward with those, you know, those quirks that a lot of times are caused by the environment that they're in right then. So, you know, don't wait till the time is right. It won't ever be right. What we find when we get out into the community is that we find that once we've found a place where the person clicks or where there's work tasks to be done that the person relates to, then we find that there's 20 other places like that. But we do have to get out of our box, and we do have to quit talking to one another about it, because we already know all the same things that each other knows. We have to talk to other folks. And we had an experience this morning where we met with the owner of a marketing firm, a rather large marketing firm. And, you know, he's got a list of 50 customers that are active right now that mostly we had never heard of. And, you know, and then we think about their supply chains. You know, and again, in job development, we'll talk more about this, but those linkages out to the community are what we need. We're so isolated in our work. And again, just always remember there are unlimited ways to make a living. So discovery is a structured process, but it's not a linear process. And that's really hard for people to grasp sometimes. We don't want to ask what job or what business would be best for this person. We want to live into those answers through the process of discovery. That those job ideas and our ability to deconstruct existing jobs and pull out tasks and you know, activities that require the skills that this person has or can learn, is a really different approach to going in and just thinking in job descriptions, which is, again, so limiting because most of us don't know what the world does for a living. We're not in the back room of Napa Auto Parts or the company that made the auto parts in the first place. Right now I'm looking out the window and it's snowing, and I'll bet you that, somewhere somebody's like loading up a truck with salt or de-icer or something. You don't know how that process works, and you've never been to the place that makes that stuff. Right? Well, that'd be a really good place to go for some people, right? But you've never been there as a job developer. Even though it's a common thing that we use every day, we don't know where that came from. And most of the stuff that we use every day, we don't know where it came from. We don't know those employers or those businesses. So we try to move with some urgency. I think the thing that's hardest in our industry is that we're not on fire. We're not walking around with our hair on fire every day. And, I can tell that when you go to get your driver's license renewed and you have to wait 15 minutes in line, you are hysterical, right? But, well, maybe you're not. I mean, Utahns are generally pretty darn nice. Not like us Montanans who are ready, to explode any minute. But we desire a sense of urgency in our lives. But, we see people waiting for 20 years for a job. It's ridiculous. So it shouldn't take that long. Discovery has a beginning and an end. Like I said, once you've got your 3 vocational themes and evidence to support those themes, you are done. We're not worried about who the person is in 10 years. This is not a predictive test. This is gathering information that already exists and putting it in a new sort of circumstance. Right? So that we can move on. It shouldn't go on and on and on. If it's going on and on and on, you're not doing it right. It's stuck. Your team is dysfunctional. Whatever the cause, you need to move on. You need to make things happen. Again, we do sort of customized employment. We do it. Our preferred method is that we set a time limit. That it is a project and it's done as project management is done, that each person has a beginning and an end as far as we're concerned, so that there is no such thing as just going on and on and on and on. We have to show action. It's the way that I manage my business, and it's the way that we prefer to manage employment programs. So we want our eyes on the future. We want jobs that lead to another job or that lead to a better job in that same company. And again, that's part of the negotiation process. Yes, bagging groceries for some people is going to be great. It's not going to be the same numbers that we have today if you do discovery, because discovery is very, very rarely going to take you to bagging groceries. Right? Most of us go to bag groceries because Safeway's hiring, not because the person we're working with has a lot of skills and talents and wants to be the best customer service person or the best bagger in the world. That's not why we go there. We go there because Safeway will hire people with intellectual disabilities to bag groceries. That is not discovery, right? So we want to go to places and negotiate jobs. And so let's say that this person has a food theme or whatever, an agricultural theme, whatever you want to call it, a culinary arts theme, something that's not a job description. And you say, oh, geez, how about we start over here where there's a lot of agricultural or culinary things, which is a grocery store. In that negotiation, it shouldn't be, oh, can he be a bagger? It should be, okay, like this bagging job, that looks great. We can job coach a little bit on this. We can figure that out. Now, let's talk about after 6 weeks when most of your baggers leave, let's talk about moving into the produce department and doing things there, or into the butcher shop, or into the deli, or into here where this person can learn more skills like baking bread or making sandwiches, or deboning a fish, or whatever it is. That's your responsibility as an employment specialist, as a good job developer, is to say that there is a trajectory here. That's no harder than just going in and going, really, it's no harder than going in and just getting that interview. And again, the thing that I look for is, did discovery take you to the place? And again, you can see this is a shot I took working on a business idea in San Diego, and we walked outside, and we had been working at the time with a young man in Pennsylvania on a fish breeding service, and we walked out, and here was this fish breeding and aquarium company now hiring fish nerds. There's a nerd in every category of the U.S. and guess what? They have a professional organization, they have an annual conference, and they have a newsletter, and you can find them wherever you are. I remember working with a guy in California who was into tumbler pigeons. He was a young man on the autism spectrum, and so I did a little research that night on tumbler pigeons, and I found out that their national organization has a conference every year, and that year it happened to be in Salt Lake City. So again, we know now that there are people interested in tumbler pigeons, and we can go learn from them about who makes the cages and who feeds the animals, who breeds the pigeons, who does initial training, all those kinds of things that are related to tumbler pigeons that could potentially start a business or create a job for that young man, right? So in the different stages, we want to do home and neighborhood visits. I want to look around the neighborhood and see, is there an employment opportunity that doesn't involve transportation? Or is there a bus line nearby? Or is there a neighbor nearby that's doing something that relates to what this person wants to do? That would be a person to talk to. Maybe not a person that's going to hire the person. We're not there yet. We're in discovery, so we're not worried about a job yet. We're worried about information from other people who do related jobs. How did you get your job, right? What was the path that you followed? Who else do you know who does this kind of work? Can we get a phone number? Can we go see these people? And you start to build this network. What kinds of things do you do when you do your job? Oh, that's an interesting tool. We've never seen that piece of technology before. This is what you're looking for. You're looking for building on what other people's experiences are. And guess what? People want to help you. People like other people who share the same interests and skills. They want to teach you what they know. So the community is not this scary place that we've made it out to be. The community is actually a fairly welcoming place, which we find every day when we're out working with businesses. They just need to know what they're getting into. Again, that idea of interviewing others, looking at skills and tasks. In discovery, you should be able to take a picture of the skill or task being performed. And if you can't, it's not discovery probably. There's probably an exception in there somewhere. Somebody who has an emerging fashion theme. They're really into makeovers and good clothes and stuff like that. Walking around the mall, window shopping is not a discovery activity. But putting makeup on somebody, that's a discovery activity. Going to learn, take a class in hair dyeing, that's a discovery activity. There has to be a verb in there, and you have to be able to take a picture of it, show it to your grandmother, and your grandmother can say, oh, that's somebody dyeing somebody's hair. I get it. Because we're going to use those pictures later when we do a digital resume for that person, right? We want to be able, for somebody without a job, having a resume is like, that's a desert for an employer. Show them pictures of the person performing tasks and skills that relate to the kind of job you're looking for, right? Much more functional approach to job development than filling out applications and taking interviews. We're going straight to the small business that doesn't have job descriptions most of the time, or doesn't have a very formal HR person, where the manager or the owner is doing the hiring and the firing. We want a human connection with folks. I don't want to go to IBM where I take somebody and they go through 6 layers of HR before they get to talk about what it is that they love about computers. I want to go to Jake's Computer Emporium on Elm Street and talk to Jake face to face, and we can share our love of computer graphic interfaces, right? So we refine, we review, we refine, we figure out where are the holes in our vocational profile. We finish our documentation so that we have some solid evidence to provide to our VR counselor, and then we move forward. Again, what am I looking for without asking through discovery? What I'm trying to determine And again, I have to thank, Mike Callahan and Ellen Condon and other people who, came up with this list as much as we came up with it. Where and when is this person in flow? When they're engaged in things in their personal life or in their work life? When and where do they have high support needs, so that I know that I need more powerful instructional strategies, or maybe I need to avoid those environments, or I need to figure out a little better how to facilitate the natural supports in a work site. I certainly want to use job coaching. Job coaching is an important piece, but again, I don't want to displace the natural trainer, somebody who would already exist there to train other people who are getting hired. I want to work with the natural trainer and give them, the benefit of what I know about the individual and how to teach. Again, I want to know people who know him or her best, because sometimes we get our best ideas from them. Not necessarily going to ask them for their recommendation of a job. Again, I don't ask people what they want to do for a living generally. That'll come out in conversation anyway. I want discovery to take me there. I want the natural process to unfold. I don't have to think very hard this way either. Discovery takes me to those places and gives me clues along the line. I want to know about tasks that the person has done well, and how did they learn them, and why do they keep doing them, because then you're on to something about that person. Again, how did they learn how to do that? Because that speaks to motivation, that speaks to instruction, that speaks to interest. So all those things are important. And just, different folks that we've worked with, Amy, who's a snake handler for a museum, and Melanie, who works at a bronze foundry during the day, but also does her art and sells this painting, sold for $350. And if you're ever in Old Town, Colorado Springs, you can see it in the health food store that's downtown. And young lady that we worked with through Covenant here, we're making pizza dough together. That's a discovery activity. And the almost naked man that we worked with at Martin Luther King Pool in Silver Spring, Maryland, who told us he was too busy to talk about his pool, and then spent 2 hours with us talking about jobs that he could help create with us. Russell here, who is doing a discovery activity in a music store in Philadelphia. He's assembling a saxophone, and he now works for that company doing repair work. He's a young man with an intellectual disability, but he grew up in a family of musicians, so he has a lot of natural talents. But if you looked at his school record, it would not show any of these things. A young man in West Virginia who works for this guy who runs a auto repair place, and this is the guy teaching him how to read a tire pressure gauge. So, again, lots of different kinds of jobs. Most of them started entry level. That's okay. We want to do functional assessment out there, whether it's grooming horses or whatever. We get into informational interviews. We've talked a bunch about those. I talked about those last time. Again, you can read about those. We can get you handouts on those. If you get our book, the Job Developer's Handbook, there's a lot in there. There's actual scripts in there. They are easy to do. They're easy to screw up, but they're easy to get a lot of information from. Again, smooth listening. When we're in discovery and we're talking with an employer or a business owner or a manager, we're asking them for advice. Here's Johnny. Johnny thinks he wants to work with snakes. We don't know very much about snakes. You're a herpetologist, so we're talking to other people who work with snakes and other kinds of animals, reptiles. And, we'd kind of like to hear your story. How did you get started? Oh, could you look at some of these pictures? Do you think an employer would be impressed by these pictures? What other kind of pictures of the tasks that Johnny does with snakes and reptiles? What would you be looking for as far as, like proof that he's telling you the truth? Whatever it is, there's a lot of different approaches to informational interviews. But remember, at this point in discovery, we're not using the informational interview to get a job. We're out there actually looking at what happens in a business. This is Kevin, along with a couple of staff and the lead flight instructor for this helicopter company that runs a flight school, sells helicopters and also repairs helicopters. They rebuild these helicopters after they've been out for, I think, 4,200 hours or something. They employ about 5 mechanics, and we were exploring because Kevin has an emerging aviation theme. When was the last time you went to a helicopter company? Again, these should not be rare photographs. And you can see we kind of had a good time there, and we learned a bunch of things. We didn't go that direction, we went this direction because he had other themes around fish and around agriculture. And so he ended up owning a business largely because of the conditions of employment. He has a high number of seizures every day. His mom was very worried about him working around helicopters and mechanics and solvents and fuel and lots of other things. And so he has a home-based business, and he grows the plants that supplies people who build koi ponds. So he's a wholesaler, he's not a retailer. And David, who is the miniature horse wrestler, doggy puncher at a ranch outside of San Diego, where he is the cowboy in charge of the miniature horses, but he works with a half a dozen other cowboys out there, has the hat and the coat and the whole deal. Again, different kinds of jobs. Don't think in job descriptions. Don't think about what business would be best for this. Quit talking about dream jobs. Dream jobs are the end of your career, not the beginning of your career. Think about ideal conditions of employment. What will keep this person as stable as possible, understanding that we are human beings, and human beings have high degrees of variability in our lives. And again, we want to match task, skills, and workplace ecology to get a good fit to folks. We're worried about like the ideal conditions of employment for a person, their strengths, their interests, their supports, their contributions, but all of this that you can grasp in a few weeks, right? You're not going to find everything about everybody. You're not going to worry so much about motivation. You're going to say, this person does this. I'm not really too interested in why they do that. I just like that they do that. That thing with that socket wrench, that's a good thing to be doing. Let's do more of that. And again, skills are observed in the performance of tasks, right? And where do we observe tasks? We observe them in lots of places, in commonly accessed environments, in the home, in the community. I like to use nonprofits for discovery activities, for short work experiences. If we can pay people, that's always the best. If there's any kind of longevity to the internship or to even a one-day work experience, if we can get pay in that person's pocket, pay matters. Pay changes performance. We know that, especially if you're a teenager, right, or a young adult. We worry about money a lot, right? Remember that when we're talking about people or jobs, generally, we only see about 20% of that person or the job that somebody is doing. We don't see the back office stuff. We don't see a lot of home life. We don't see a lot of other things. So discovery gets us back in there. And I'm probably running pretty low on time, I think, Tim. Can you tell me about where we are? And I'll kind of keep talking here. So this is just a picture of a very simple discovery activity. A young lady with a sort of a culinary arts emerging theme. Great, thanks, Tim. Sort of an emerging culinary theme. And so one of the first places that we went was to her house, and she made us lunch. She cooks great Mexican food, and we said, okay, so we know that you can cook that stuff that you've cooked for your mom for 20 years. What do you want to cook that you've never cooked before? And she said, well, a pineapple upside down cake. And that's her pineapple upside down cake that we cooked. We also went to, she's bilingual, so we went to a local farmer's market, and she negotiated for the vegetables and the stuff and the spices that she used to cook our lunch. She did most of that in Spanish, and she had a great time, and folks there really liked her. She ended up working in a local market or a mercado where she works in the deli, and she makes breakfast burritos in the morning and then tortas in the afternoon for people's lunches, day labor lunches. And we enhanced that job. The employer didn't have more hours for her. She was working about 25 hours a week, somewhere in that range. And so we leveraged about $3,000 through a couple different sources, VR being one of them, and bought a couple horchata machines. So she owns those. She pays the owner of the market rent of about 15% for electricity and water, and then she manages those. She cleans those. She keeps those up so that the health department's happy with them. And they're self-serve machines, so what she has to do is clean them several times a day, put the rice milk mixture and the fruit in them, make sure that they're full of ice, and the cups and all that, the straws and everything are stocked. But it was a nice way of adding, $100, $200 more a week to her take-home pay. Again, things that we're not thinking about, we came up with that through unmet needs. The employer didn't have $3,000 sitting around for that machine, but certainly had people looking for that. Again, lots of different activities, out in a laundromat doing clothes with a guy, doing a paid internship at a daycare center, Joe raising chickens in upstate New York, Joanne doing work for me in one of my offices as a clerical person in a transition program, and being supported by Voc Rehab. Again, all of those things, we're taking data, we're figuring out what works and what doesn't work for this person. And again, we'll come back to other activities. I want to leave some time for some questions. I always come up with more stuff than I can ever cover, and I've kind of done that again. We try to take pictures of folks doing their jobs or doing their discovery tasks so that we can put them in a digital portfolio that we can use with employers. We can, if the person doesn't have verbal language, we can narrate a PowerPoint and have the person use it on their iPad, or the person can learn a script and describe what they're doing. Here's a young man in Maine that works on the family farm, but he was thinking about getting a job off the farm. So a digital portfolio was put together. He ended up changing his mind and staying on the farm. But here he is running his Kawasaki mule on the farm. This is a young man on the autism spectrum. But it shows that he's split wood. It shows that he can drive. He's loading the milk barn external wood-fired heater so he can do dangerous work. He's on his walkie-talkie back to his boss, so it shows that he communicates. He's also a member of the Whiting Volunteer Fire Department. He's not a mascot. He's passed all the courses, and he is a volunteer firefighter. And he has a Studebaker pickup, which we thought, well, some employer there, just about every employer in Maine owns a pickup truck, so something to talk about. So again, sorry I've gone through really fast here in a lot of ways, but again, go on our website. There's materials there. I would check our Facebook page. Just go to Facebook and type in Griffin Hammis Associates, and it'll pop up. You might want to subscribe to that or get the feed to that, like us, because we constantly post things that we're working on. We post new materials. We post links to our podcasts, which are up on iTunes. And then we have books, the Job Developer's Handbook, Making Self-Employment Work for People with Disabilities, which has a brand new chapter. It's coming out in May. The second edition comes out, in March. And it has a brand new discovery chapter in it that you could read that chapter, and that chapter would help you with both self-employment and wage employment. You should go to the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor, and again, Utah DSPD, Utah State University. I know Tim has a bunch of resources. So anyway, I will take questions if you want to type them in, or if, Tim, you can open people's microphones, whatever. We'll stick around for a little bit. And thanks. It's always a whirlwind doing these things, so I hope it was fun.
Thanks, Cary. There was a question up above. I think I'm scrolling through where the question was. Oh, Deb Jenkins.
How long do you set?
Yeah. How long do you set for a person for a job placement?
How long do you set? I'm not exactly sure what that question means. Um, Again, we're doing customized job development. If we're doing discovery, we're not really doing placement, right? We're doing job development or job creation with them. So I'm not exactly sure if you're asking how long do you ask for Voc Rehab to give us to get somebody a job. That's usually a milestone payment in most states. They give you a set number of hours. So that varies from person to person, and it varies from state to state. So I'm not sure I can answer that really, really well. Usually the better discovery we've done, the easier it is to get the person a job. I will say that no job development is easy. Okay, so you said you manage each person from start to finish to discovery to the end. Well, when I say us, I mean our demonstration sites and whatnot. We don't do direct service anymore. I did when I was still at the University of Montana, but we don't do that anymore. Adding up those hours, it's so variable because it varies from state to state. And so, and again, from disability to disability, I can't tell you exactly how many hours, but we try to manage the process from start to finish. We know that discovery shouldn't take more than about 50 hours, and that's the outside. The average about 30 hours. Job development, again, are we creating a business? That generally takes us longer than getting somebody, an entry-level position at Kmart or at the Goat Ranch, or, are we working with somebody with a psychiatric disability who has a master's degree in library science? That's a whole different job development process than that. So I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for that. If you want to email me later or call me next week when I'm back in the office, I'm happy to talk with you, Deb, about that, because I know it's a real issue. And I'd kind of like to get some more information, and that'd help me. The DSR, if you email me, I can send you that. It's cgriffin@griffinhammis.com. It's also a handout in our books. You can also, I think there's a fairly recent edition. If you go to griffinhammis.com and you go into the resources, there should be a copy up there. If folks want, I can post a copy on Facebook and you can download it. There's lots of ways to get it. So I hope that helps, Carol. Other things?
Well, thanks, Cary. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so I really appreciate your time. And just as a reminder, we have 2 other webinars scheduled with Cary, one on March 26th. This one Cary will go over negotiation, and the final webinar is on May 7th, and we'll go over self-employment and micro enterprises. So once again, Cary, I thank you for your time. This is great information. And for those of you who are attending this webinar, utilize the links on the web links to access Cary's information. He's got a lot of great stuff on his websites. And if you also can fill out the evaluation form that's on the web links page, and I'll post it. I'll also send a link on the chat box as well, and you can access the evaluation there. So again, I thank you, Cary, for your time. And if there are no other questions, we're good to go.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you.